Hey guys, and welcome back. Now today we're going to be going over my compact travel gear setup for shooting photo, video, and film. Alright, so before we get started, let me just preface this by saying this is my personal preference. But through what I've done and what I've experimented with, this is kind of the route I'm going to be taking into 2020 for my upcoming trips. And I really want to focus on getting my travel kit down in size while also being able to still shoot the different formats and different things that I need to for each trip without having to lug all that gear around, of course. That being said, we're going to start with the workhorse of this kit, which is the Fuji X-T3. I'm a big fan of this camera. You can look up 100 different videos and reviews on this, but quickly I'll just say I've been using it for about 8 months. Before that, I was using the X-T2, still do, that's what I'm shooting with right now. You can shoot 4K video with this up to 60 frames a second in F-Log, and then also all the way up to 120 in 1080 in F-Log as well. It also has a 26 megapixel camera, which is great for stills. It's crisp, it's sharp, it's got plenty of what you need for shooting photo and video. And the setup of the body is very similar to shooting film. And then also with the different filters and things, it lends itself very well to shooting with vintage lenses, which we'll get to in a little bit. Lenses for that kit. We're gonna start with this. This is the 16 to 55 2.8 XF zoom lens. And I primarily and almost exclusively use this lens. It is great with what I do. I need to be able to get a wide establishing shot and then also get a really tight working shot. And usually I don't have enough time to switch lenses in between. So this is become a staple for me. It is a zoom lens, but zoom lenses have come a long way in the past decade and are much more reliable and much sharper than what they used to be. Another lens that I don't use as much, but I would like to, is I have the 35mm 1.4 XF lens. Now remember, Fuji is a 1.4 crop, so the 16 to 55 that I have is gonna shoot more like a 24 to 85, and then also the 35 that I'm using right now with this setup is gonna shoot more like a 50mm. Now remember that cropping factor because it is gonna come into play a little bit. What's nice about the 35mm and shooting on the crop sensor Fuji X-T3 is that the lenses are much smaller and much more compact than they are gonna be with full frame. I don't always bring the 35mm with me. It is another great lens from Fuji. So that kind of covers the photo and video aspect of it digitally. Now let's get into the film setup that I have. So the 35mm camera I'm about to show you is probably not exactly what you're expecting, but I'm going with this camera because of the lens system it's built around, not so much the actual camera body. That being said, the camera for the 35mm setup, starting out in 2020, is gonna be the Pentax Asahi Spot-O-Matic. However you say it, I mean, it's like saying Nikon and Nikon. Everybody's got a preference. Now this is the all black version of this. It is in great shape, pristine, it's very smooth. The wind on it as well as the shutter, it just feels nice. My good friend Chris, who knows a lot more about cameras than I do, handed me this and just told me to go try it out. When it had a 51.4 on it, he wanted to make sure it works and all that stuff because he just cleaned it up, serviced it, and I can definitely tell. I have the same exact body in silver and I'm not a huge fan of it, probably because it's silver, and then also it's just not as smooth as this body. So I didn't think I was gonna like this body originally. However, after taking it on my most recent trip to Hawaii, I really kind of grew fond of it. And I think that's just because it is in such great shape and has been taken care of. It just feels really nice using this camera. Now, as I said, I didn't pick this just because of the body. I picked it because of the lens system it's built around. So this camera is built around an M42 mount, and with that M42 mount, specifically the Super-Takumar lenses. So with that, I have 4 different lenses up here. I have the 35mm 3.5 lens, I have the 50mm 1.4 lens, the 85mm 1.9 lens, and then the 135 3.5. Why the M42 mount and why the Super-Takumar lenses? These lenses have a great reputation. Are they any better than Canon or Nikon or thing like that? As always, it depends on the lens and the time period it was built around. These lenses in particular are known for being built a little more compact than other 35mm lenses. Again, varies with age, but then also they're just great lenses. They have a good look to them. They're sharp. The bokeh is similar in a way to a Helios, but more oval and less hexagonal, I think is what the Helios is. I can't remember how many sides it's got. The focus pull on these is also really nice how it's set up. From what I've read also, they are a little less susceptible to things like fungus just because of the way they were built. However, some of them can be radioactive because that was just something that somehow factored into building them more compact. They had to adjust materials that they were using. One of the downsides of the Super-Takumar lenses is that they're gonna have a little bit of color fringing around the edges and things like that, which I talked about in a previous video where I shot the 85mm lens on my Fuji X-T2, which ended up being more like a 135, but you can see around the brim of a hat and things like that, where the lighting kind of behind him kind of overlapped onto the edges of the hat, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, again, anything you can do to separate yourself as far as your photos and videos and your style kind of adds to it. So is that a bad thing? It's really up to personal preference. I don't mind it too much considering it's a very small amount. So we have our two bodies and we have our lens setup. Now here's where it gets interesting. This is a FX to M42 adapter. This will cost you about $20 on Amazon. It's a little bit thick. I think they have another one that's a little more of a flush mount. That's about the same price. So remember, with the Fuji system, it's a 1.4 crop. So a 35mm is gonna shoot like a 50. A 50 is gonna shoot like 85 and so on and so forth. So if all I need for my Fuji is a 16 to 55 for autofocus, and the rest of my lenses, I'm not necessarily gonna need it or use it, or I can do it manually, then I don't need to bring my Fuji 35 1.4. I can, however, bring the 35mm 3.5 with the adapter. So now I have the 35 for the Pentax, and then with the adapter, I have a 50mm for the Fuji. So let's take it a step further. This is an M42 to FX speed booster. So those of you who know already know. Those of you who don't, what this does is it keeps the 35mm a 35mm and also gives you an extra f-stop. So a 35 3.5 is going to actually shoot like a full frame 35 3.5. You're not going to lose that full 35mm frame. It won't shoot like a 50mm, and also you're going to keep that f-stop. You're not going to lose that depth of field because you're shooting on a crop sensor or anything. So then a 50mm 1.4 is going to shoot like a 50mm 1.4, and then on the Pentax it'll be a 51.4. So if I take both of the adapters and I take that 50mm 1.4 with the Pentax system and the Fuji system, I now have a 50mm 1.4 for the Pentax, as well as a 50mm 1.4 and an 85mm 1.4 for the Fuji. So one lens now becomes three. Yes, you do have the adapters, but they are substantially smaller than most lenses. So this is where you can kind of pick and choose and mix and match depending on what your trip is. I would never take all 5 Takumar lenses on a trip, as well as my Fuji system, but you pick and choose depending on where you're gonna go. If you're gonna go do more of an urban type thing, you might wanna bring a 85mm for portraits and then a 50mm for street photography. If you're gonna be doing a lot of hiking, you might wanna take a 35 and then you might want to just take the 50, or maybe you want the 135 to bring in those mountains or whatever's in the background. You just kind of mix and match. And then with the adapters, it allows you to do the same thing with the Fuji system. Now with this setup, I'm not limited to the Pentax body or the Super-Takumar lenses. Because they are an M42 mount and I have those adapters, I can also use Voigtlander glass. I can use Leica glass. I can use Helios glass. Anything that has that M42 mount, I now have the option to use with the X-T2 body or with the Pentax body. Also, if I decide I don't want to use that body anymore, I could try and find something more compact. Since that Pentax Asahi is a little bit on the bigger side, I could go for something smaller like a Leica. No, wouldn't do. Maybe I want to go opposite. Maybe I want to get something bulkier, like a Zenit, and take that on a trip or two. I have that option because of the M42 mount. And just like I'm not tied to Pentax glass, I'm also not tied to the M42 system. This setup translates over to any mount type that you want. If you prefer to use your Nikon glass, you can get the Nikon adapter. If you want to use your old Canon glass, you can get an adapter for that. The main thing that I'm doing here is consolidating and making sure that I can use the same lenses across both my camera bodies, and then also provide me the best option for shooting photo and video, and then also a reliable option for shooting 35mm film. Obviously, if I wanted to get really compact, I could just take a point and shoot in the GoPro and call it a day. It's actually not a bad idea. But we want to use something a little bit more professional and give us something that just has a few more options for what we want to shoot. The Pentax system is just what I've decided to start out with this year. What I'm trying to do is stay compact, but still give me plenty of options. Great example is I have this Nikon 50mm 1.2, and then this is the Pentax 50mm 1.4. As you can see, the size difference is quite substantial in both directions. Now the downside is the speed booster is going to cost you a little bit more. Whereas the regular adapter is about $20, this is going to cost you just over $100 for this adapter. And that's one of the things you're going to have to weigh out. Is it worth it as far as the versatility and being able to use that lens as is on a crop sensor body, or if you're fine with just using a regular adapter. Also, you have to factor in that these film lenses are going to be smaller than digital lenses and much less expensive. So you might spend $40, $50 on a vintage lens and $120 on the adapter, whereas a full frame lens or even a Fuji lens is going to cost you $300, $400, $500 all the way up to a few thousand depending on what you get. So that's going to wrap it up on my camera systems and the lenses that I've chosen. Obviously, this does not include things like GoPros, drones, gimbals, any of that stuff. This is kind of just the basic setup that I'm going to be using throughout all my trips. And then just depending on where I go and how much room I have for packing things, I'll add in the other stuff like drones and everything like that. If you want to see more reviews or videos on using these lenses, these camera systems, and then some other stuff, be sure you subscribe, like, comment down below. Let me know if this is the lens system for you, or if you prefer a Canon setup or a Nikon setup for something like this. It's all just going to come down to what best suits you, as well as maybe what you already have available. So thank you again for watching. Be sure you subscribe so you can see these lenses in my future travel videos. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video.